If you've ever seen the animated movie Anastasia, you probably have some idea of what happened during the Russian Revolution of 1917. By the way, the movie is highly inaccurate. Anastasia was actually murdered along with her family by Bolshevik communist revolutionaries. The Russian Revolution of 1917 consisted of two left-wing revolutions, one in February and one in October, that resulted in the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II and the ultimate establishment of the Soviet Union as the world's first communist state. In this lesson, we'll look at the class system prior to the uprisings, which can help us understand one critical reason why the Russian Revolution broke out. In order to understand the class system in Imperial Russia, or Russia under the rule of its czars, we need to look at the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain around the mid-18th century, and over the next 100 years, it spread throughout Europe to the United States, and eventually other parts of the world. It was characterized by rapid industrial and technological advances in the areas of iron production, machine tooling, steam power, and textile manufacturing. The Industrial Revolution helped give rise to a middle class. Russia, however, did not experience the Industrial Revolution to nearly the same extent as other European countries, like Great Britain or Germany. Basically, Russia was a technologically backward country. Because of this, the middle class in Russia was unable to develop like it did elsewhere. Without a significant middle class, all power and wealth were in the hands of a few, while the vast majority of people had almost nothing. Maybe you've heard of medieval serfdom. Under the system of serfdom, peasants labored on a tract of land that belonged to someone else. Serfs didn't own the property, but were allowed to live on a tiny section of the land they worked. Their harvests belonged to the landowner, usually a wealthy noble or lord, but serfs were allowed to keep a small amount of the harvest in order to survive. Russian serfs basically had no rights and were little more than slaves. In Russia, serfdom existed until 1861, when Tsar Alexander II abolished the practice. Even after serfdom was officially abolished, the peasant class had few opportunities to better themselves, toiling continually and suffering in horrifying living conditions. Let's look at the socioeconomic composition of Russia in the years before the Bolshevik takeover. Estimates vary somewhat, but roughly 80 to 82% of the Russian population belonged to the peasant class. Approximately 12 to 13% of the population consisted of royalty, the nobility, and the clergy. The remaining 4 to 6% was composed of the middle and working class. So you can see how power and wealth was concentrated in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. The ideas of Karl Marx were extremely influential among the Russian lower class. Karl Marx is considered the father of communism, at least theoretical communism. His Communist Manifesto, written with Friedrich Engels and published in 1848, laid out the intellectual framework for communism. According to Marxist theory, those who owned the means of production, or the factories and stores, and had access to power and wealth, belonged to a social class called the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie were essentially educated capitalists and upper-middle-class citizens. The bourgeoisie managed and supervised the proletariat, the working class who had no real economic value aside from their ability to provide cheap labor. Oftentimes, the term proletariat refers only to the industrial working class, not the peasantry. However, during the Russian Revolution, many peasants aligned themselves with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. This class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat came to a head in the Russian Revolution, the result of years of struggle between the haves and the have-nots. During the revolution, the proletariat rose up and seized power from the bourgeoisie. Let's review. The Russian Revolution of 1917 consisted of two left-wing revolutions, one in February and the other in October, that resulted in the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II and the ultimate establishment of the Soviet Union as the world's first communist state. It was the result of years of class conflict that originated with serfdom, whereby peasants labored on a tract of land that belonged to someone in the upper class. Unlike other European countries and the United States, Russia was not affected by the Industrial Revolution, which began in Great Britain around the mid-18th century and over the next 100 years spread throughout Europe and other parts of the world. This prevented the middle class from developing in Russia. Estimates vary somewhat, but roughly 80 to 82% of the Russian population belonged to the peasant class. Approximately 12 to 13% of the population consisted of royalty, the nobility, and the clergy. while the remaining 4 to 6% was composed of the middle and working class. The communist philosophy of Karl Marx, the father of communism, and co-author with Friedrich Engels of the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, laid out the intellectual framework for communism. According to Marxist theory, the bourgeoisie are the capitalist upper middle class that owns the means of production and supervises the proletariat, the lower working class who labor for low wages. The class struggle between these groups led directly to the Russian Revolution of 1917.